Hello, and welcome to another Proko stream. Today I'm joined by literal art doctor Stephen Michael Hampton, who's going to be taking us through some figure construction. Right now on Proko, you can get Stephen's courses for 20% off because there is a sale on Proko for the whole rest of this month for everything 20% off for Black Friday. You can see this course here of Stephen's, Intro to Figure Construction. You can see his head drawing and construction course here. You guys might also have seen some of Stephen's books on every single art store shelf that you've ever gone to. But if you can't buy something right now, there's also a challenge going right now around drawing, gesture, like Stephen is so good at teaching. Stephen, how's it going today?
It's going well. How are you doing, Stephen?
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I gotta say, I appreciate you, like I was telling you earlier, for being the final Stephen for all of these art streams with Stephen art instructors. It's great to have you.
Good. There's an army, apparently.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Do you think that having the name Stephen predisposes us to art?
Yeah, I think in a way, like you're rejected from culture if you have it. Like then you're left out in the cold with no other option than to do something in the arts where you're locked up in a room.
Yeah, this is what they need. They need from us. This is how we survive.
Yeah.
All right. Well, for today, for anyone who might not know, what is the thing that we're going to be going over today?
I think gesture. I think we're going to talk about gesture, or I mean, I'm really open to taking any questions at all or discussing anything. But because the gesture challenge is going on right now, if anybody wants to kind of go through that or has questions on that, that sounds fun. But I'm really open for anything.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So for anyone who is interested, the text on screen there will be where you guys can learn more about that challenge, and then I'll drop that into the chat as well. Well, for those who haven't maybe looked into the challenge, what is that actual challenge?
So there's an upcoming gesture course relatively soon, Proko, that I did and I'm kind of excited about, because gesture is always such this confusing, like weird and ambiguous subject for people. So to do a challenge and to do a course was like a really exciting opportunity to just try to put something out there that maybe like helps avoid a ton of confusion and maybe even also give a different assessment of it to help people out. And then the challenge is a 3-week challenge going through different types of poses. And then it's wrapping up here pretty soon. And then I'm going to pick some winners, and then they're going to get, I think, a gesture course for free. And then maybe something else.
Yeah, they'll get some free stuff. Definitely the course itself, which, I mean, I've gotten to look at it. I don't think you've gotten to necessarily look at it quite so much since recording.
They don't show me anything at your work.
It's true. Yeah, once you touch the thing, you're done. Yeah, you're done. We do the rest.
It's nice.
Yeah, no, it's good. I got to look at the course. It's a very handy one. As a person who's not necessarily the best at gesture, I oftentimes think that there's specific things that are lacking, but I don't really have the idea of what that thing is. Yeah. I think that it was really handy to get to watch some of those lessons. So
nice.
Yeah, I mean, here's
my
hoping.
Thing is, I think gesture is it's confusing when it's always taught as a technique or like a style, and I think it's better described as a stage. And that's really how I tried to approach it, like more as a stage and state, not as just the technique.
No, I think it's fair. Yeah, it's definitely, there's some concepts that I think that are taught in school in general, and then art school, and when they start really focusing in on stuff, where the approach of it can sometimes hinder the student. There's just something where you kind of put the cart before the horse in the way that it's taught, and so it's hard to undo that idea.
Yeah, I think so.
For anyone who is in the chat right now live, please ask some questions. We'll stack them up. I think some of the basic ones that we'll probably want to make sure and get out of the way is, I don't think you use like a particular brush in Photoshop or anything. You using Photoshop is kind of a means to an end for instruction. It's not that you have some favorite brush, right?
No, I mean, I have, like, because it's a common question, I put like brushes of mine on YouTube, but it's just like, I mean, it's really simple in terms of like, I just have pressure sensitivity on a round Photoshop brush. It's nothing that I like customize to any, like like refined and researched and then put together. And it's very like kind of, it's just emulating a traditional pencil best I can in digital.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, get your guys' questions in there. If you can start them with a little cue in the beginning of it, or like at Proko in there, it'll help me to see them and kind of stack them up a little better. Steven, take it away. Start teaching us while people get their questions in.
Okay. So I think about, let's talk a little bit about gesture, just so that you have my thoughts on it, and relative to the course, how it would be taught. And I'll just throw some stuff out there for anybody that's interested. Uh, and I'm going to talk more about the things that are interesting to me about gesture, what I'm drawn to, because there's so much information. You could find lectures for gesture all over the place. But for me, it's always most interesting when it echoes and is most compatible or parallel to your thought process, right? That's all it is. And gesture is the hardest to teach for me because I have to go through all of these mental gymnastics to unravel what everybody thinks that they should be doing early on, usually around like ideas of what's real and what isn't. And like, I'm not trying to introduce you to the matrix and like, this is real and that's not. But I think there are subtleties around how we define realism. So like, I think everybody here could probably agree that gesture is about, putting down in broad terms what it is that you want to accomplish. Like what is your basic intention? And so to help guide people to that specific, that mapping, right, or that planning of a figure instead of the execution of the contour, I usually go through like a little bit of history, a little bit of, like different ideational processes, and just start comparing and contrasting to allow people to loosen up. But otherwise, like I'll kind of work through a list. And usually at the top of that list is, why are you doing something? And I find this is usually the hardest for people to answer, but for me, it's the most interesting because it's when we get to have like our purest intention or the purest quality of thought come out in the drawing. Everything after that is just kind of like polishing or refining or like moving things around or changing the lighting. But if that original concept or like the story or whatever it is that you want for your figure doesn't exist, it's hard to get anything done. And that's when like discussions of this come in, right? So what holds people back with gesture most of the time early on is that we all intuitively started drawing by outlining things, right? So like I did, and I started copying image comics. That was my favorite thing to copy. It's maybe not the best idea for anybody ever to just copy that to learn drawing, but I learned by copying the outside. And that's kind of hanging on to a picture of realism that's defining the shape, right? The exterior as the idea of something.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, maybe that's a good idea, maybe not. But I think a lot of people qualify that as realistic, right? It's real to them when there's an appropriate contour and that contour is set and defined and then it's shaded and it looks like what a photo would produce. And to me, realism is not that. It's actually what is closest to my intention or my thought process. And so I like a style or a thinking of gesture that can almost be diagrammatic or have diagram-esque qualities, because it's how I'm thinking. It's like it's an embodiment of how I'm thinking about something. And so that's like, I would say that's my why, or that's how I start to introduce the why. But like we can even make it broader. Like if I'm starting a piece, a drawing, a painting, whatever it is, there has to be a stage which is ideational or beginning the thinking process. And then I would separate that into other components, like what am I drawing? And then maybe even past that, how? And I think, as someone that's been interested in the arts and studying the arts for, 25 years, that's what I was interested in. Like, and even in subject and category, like how to make something as illustrational, right? Why to make something might be heavily on concept and fine art inspired. What are we doing and what have we done might be art historical, right? In terms of the subject and its field. So art for me is, right, even though this is such a simple and like haphazard looking entry to the drawing, like it does possess for me like these different layers of organization and thought. And so the why, what, and how for me is the holistic piece of art, like illustration, fine art, how you make something, why you would make it, and what does it relate to historically or in some kind of broader context. So in my planning, then gesture for me would have like a drop down menu. So under why I could say, well, what are my big concerns about, let's say specifically now to the figure. And so first might be, well, what is the idea that the figure is supposed to be in the service of, right? Maybe that's comics, maybe it's classicism, maybe it's I want to study the Renaissance. The figure behaves differently in all of those. So in teaching gesture, what I always try to emphasize is that it's a vehicle. So it's a thing that's meant to provide some kind of narrative content, or it's supposed to allow someone to understand something, right? And so already I think we're out of this, like, or this is what I mean by it takes more explanation than actual drawing, because, right, I'm trying to convince people for a moment that their normal course of, okay, outside, render the nipple, right, then down, and so on and so forth, isn't maybe the best course for like the planning and the execution. But like as we start to move down after something big, I gradually become more and more specific. So if it's, let's say you don't need to kind of consider a larger idea, but what idea could be, like an idea that I talk about in the gesture courses, like the Vitruvian Man is an idea about the figure in a historically specific era.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like, it doesn't look like a person. Like this doesn't look like a photoreal person. This is an idea about, harmony and how that relates to humanism and broader ideas about, like cultural meaning during the Renaissance. That's an idea. Or maybe even like story archetypes is an idea for film or for game or whatever it is. And then after that, I start to move into what is a specific story. And in gesture, I look at this as what interests me more about gesture and the story of the body now is a study of nonverbal behaviors. And so I've been gathering books about this lately, mostly from like, there's some really good books on nonverbal cues from FBI informants that just study body language and if people are lying. So, so I don't know if you want me to go in a different direction, but this is where I'd start out with gesture. If this sounds insane, you could just let me know too.
No, this makes sense. Cause I mean, let's say it was about the idea of you're going to sit down and do some sort of drawing or a painting or anything like that, and it's for a different client. If you're doing something that's supposed to be about like showing off like a watch or some piece of technology or some product, that's wildly different than if you're doing some ad for like a dance studio.
Sure.
The kind of the way that you'll approach gesture, showing the landmarks of the body and everything, the things you'll prioritize, those are all wildly different based on the intended purpose.
Right. Or if you want any of those examples you gave and you want your figure to have a specific like attitude, right? Or psychology. Well, it doesn't have to be a mystery, right? We don't like sometimes there's too much mystery built into gesture for me. And, because I was raised Catholic, I don't want any more mystery. I had enough mystery. Like I'm good with mystery. But like there's a set that, we do things with our bodies that express certain cues that let people know how we're feeling. So I think the study of gesture, like for the way it's normally taught, where you do rapid poses, you go look at people in everyday situations, and you try to connect with how they're positioned and capture that in a really economical way. Well, I think we can attach that to some very rigid outcomes. So people have, in terms of their nonverbal cues and behaviors, really specific things that they do. And you can break it down into like fight, freeze, the different kind of like physiological things that our brains will do in response to threat, or how our body might change based on feeling confident or not feeling confident, or maybe subtle things like we tend to touch the pit of our neck or the top of our sternum if we're uncomfortable, because there's more nerve endings here. And so if we do this, it's kind of soothing. So those are the things, like in terms of study of the body and psychology, that I think help make gesture more manageable. So it's like every level for me is about trying to slowly introduce a rigid framework, right? Even though they're big ideas and there's a lot there, if you start from something big and then kind of narrow it, then I think it makes the practice or the study of gesture more fun, and like there's more architecture around it to gauge whether or not you're being more or less successful. So
Yeah.
like in broad strokes, that would start. After that, then I would work, like, let's say this is largely subjective. So that's just what you want to do. And that for you is whatever it is. Past that, I tend to make arguments for the body having really specific mechanics. So these would be more objective phenomena, like things that the body has, where if I don't hit them in like quick lines or in a setup, you can make an argument for a different type of genre. So like there's truly nothing wrong with this guy. You know, if you have like the symmetry, you know, that doesn't look like realism for some specific reasons, but it would be like a nice thing for South Park, right? Or something like that. So the style might be appropriate for a different type of genre. But for the body, I try to teach gesture with a heavy emphasis on weight and balance. And that's like, that would come from starting to look at, you know, simple mechanics of the spine or the skeleton, and kind of now looking at the 8 parts of the body in a way that produces designs that are consistent. So like if I'm looking at the body, one thing I want to teach myself early on, if I'm rapidly sketching the figure for, you know, trying to build efficiency and economy with storytelling, and I want that to be built around a language of realism, is looking at how the spine sets the 8 parts into a specific, you know, type of balance. So this would be trying to look for visual themes. So like looking at a side view, or in the course we look for, I go through the front, side, and back, and then we just pick out kind of repeating and consistent things. But I start from the spine, right? So when I look at the spine, I'm breaking that into 3 parts. So that would have the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar. And my gesture lecture doesn't have a lot of anatomy in a direct way. But from the spine, I make the argument that, you know, even though it's very intuitive to want to capture an outside and then render it, that really from the get-go here, you're arguing against a feeling of naturalism, depending on how you'd like to define any of these, right? Realism, naturalism. Like in art history, realism is defined as making the work of representation difficult. So realism as a genre, like Manet, Courbet, is about challenging the viewer with difficult imagery and difficult handling. So all these, you know, these terms can have different interpretations depending on and when and where we're using them. But for naturalism, I'm thinking about naturalism anatomically, whereas our muscles are this, right? Our muscles are asymmetrical. I'm trying to get that to be noticed and seen by students really early on. So I try to push them out of this to embrace that. But to get here, right, to get to something that I think is really what's happening at the contour instead of what we think is happening, we start from the inside. So what does the spine do? Well, the spine is a chaotic tower, right? So it's, even if we're bipedal and upright, the spine isn't vertical. It's only vertical because there's a series of diagonals that are counterbalanced. So then after that, we look at, well, from that, then your head is pushed forward, your rib cage is angled diagonal to that, the pelvis is set at a counter diagonal, because they're all echoes to whatever's starting with the spine. And so then we get one step closer, right? So it's weight and balance. Right now we're kind of trying to connect with the natural story of the body, just for being, you know, our body. So we've taken it out of like the largely subjective realm and or cultural, and then toward the larger gestalt of the body and how we interpret meaning from one another or transmit meaning to one another. And then we've gone down another level into, well, what is the specific story of how the body's put together? And I try to extract from each level of this an information, so that information so that can inform the way something is made. So what I would be doing with the skeleton is a discussion of the what. So I've kind of shifted out of my why, or the larger kind of just thinking or thought process, and into, well, what am I drawing? And if I keep it as the 8 parts of the human, then I can always substitute this later for something else. It could be an animal. Or I could, in other words, I could aim this same thought process at any number of subjects. Right? It doesn't have to be figure specific. And that's something I do like. I do like that the way I teach is more gesture as a stage or a way of thinking, and not gesture as a just do it like I do it. It's not just technique. So maybe you do your own thinking and you decide a different type of technique. That would be fantastic. In the course, I use 2 different styles of gesture. One that's better for constructive design and drawing, and the other more for shape, pattern, and value-based types of drawing. So in the 8 parts, the themes, or all the different themes that we find, is that the figure is just made of a constant balance, just balancing act all the way up and down. And everything is in tension. So what's normal or what's realistic about us in this type of stance or overall posture is a chaotic balance, like a troubled balance, which I think is interesting for its antagonisms and just for visual contrast. So this, right, that we are these chaotic towers, and you could see that everywhere, right, where it's the leg having a directional imbalance from top to bottom, or the spine, as we've already discussed, or the different textures of the body, that we go from hard to soft to hard to soft, that there's contrasts everywhere. Or any number of different areas. And then for me, that would go one step, once I'm done with the discussion of the what, into, well, how do I want to represent that? Like, what is visually the most convincing technique, the most convincing type of linear description that would produce all of these things that I've covered? So like in step 3, I put in my step 3 drop down would be, well, figures also have to showcase a quality of motion. And then step 4 might be, well, proportion is pretty important, but I'm going to put it last because I think it's not something I want to be hung up on really early. But if I check in with 3, like how is movement produced in art? Well, you could go through your design list or your design mechanics, and you could think about, well, there's movement and continuity, there's repetition, there's all these different ways, objective ways in design that we can make somebody think that something has emotion to it. But you can also just look at how people have treated the body that are really successful with movement. And probably, Disney is probably one of the better ones, even if you hate it. I mean, I don't really like Disney movies, but page 68 of The Illusion of Life has a great chart for Disney, where it's just it shows, it's a little box, and it has a lot of text description here. And then on the side, there's lines that go from that. And then, slowly it shifts into asymmetry. So it's really Disney's exploring the difference from this, which would be Steamboat Willie, to asymmetry, which would be Snow White. And then they just tell you, this sucked, we were going bankrupt. This is great, because now we have lots of money, and Snow White looked fantastic. And so asymmetry is what they used. And then if you do a bigger historical dive, you can find it in a lot of periods of populist art. Like if you look at not Byrne Hogarth, but William Hogarth, the British painter and printmaker, he had a treatise on aesthetics that he would just write about, asymmetry and movement. And he described a serpentine line and how it dipped and delighted the eye. And so there's tons of information in books and literature and art on the best ways that movement has produced, or that artists have produced, a sensation of movement. And so we can move on from that and say, all right, well, I'm going to be using for gesture a straight, a C, and an S. That's it. And so from all this research and thinking, now I can start to attribute ways that I want to use these. And so now we're kind of at ground level talking about line. And now I'm ready to bring a certain degree of economy to it, because I've thought through all these things, and now my line can have, that direct brevity of information that people like from a gesture. And so sometimes people get mad at me when I do this, and I understand because I'm long-winded, and some of these ideas don't seem to make sense to what gesture is, or to, so people are like, just shut up and draw, monkey. There's also that too. But gesture is taking what's the challenge of gesture? You're taking a highly complex form and you're trying to present it in the most simple terms. You're editing everything down to, like a single idea. Well, you have to start from the complex to get to the simple. And if you don't, my worry is that you're just going to be using somebody else's technique and not, not doing something that has meaning to you. And sometimes that's the way you learn, where you just go through like the mirroring of someone else's approach until it makes sense. There's nothing wrong with that. But this might help you own it more.
Yeah,
So
I think there are those times where someone, like there's some like iconic representation, like iconographic representation of something in art, and they don't understand the idea of why that thing looks like it does. And so they just end up doubling down accidentally on either the mistakes of the person who they're copying from, or just drawing without knowledge of the thing. And so you end up with something that's just communicating ideas that they didn't intend, without even knowing what they're doing wrong or how. There were a couple questions in here.
Great.
So you said there were some people who say, like the just draw monkey kind of thing, or why even bother doing all of these things?
Yeah.
For someone who might not know, what is gesture for a beginner artist? What is gesture and why do we need this thing?
Right. I think it's kind of what I introduced earlier. Gesture is laying out your idea so that you can have the opportunity to decide if you want to develop it or not. But I would say it's really synonymous with artistic idea. Like, you can go through the process of drawing a figure, but what if how do you know you're even that you like it? Like, it's committing to something before doing it. Or that would be to me, something that's be kind of traumatic, is to spend a ton of time rendering something before really working through the idea. So I would say it's about understanding what your idea is.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah, it's like that measure twice, cut once kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. And then it might be alarming to not have an idea.
Yeah.
Right.
This is very true.
Or
because then
an indication that you need to develop one.
So there's a person in here in the chat who might we might get a little bit of commentary on, if he's still here. So earlier you were demonstrating the way that the spine works in the figure, and we had a comment from Rembert Montal, who I believe you know Rembert, correct?
I think so. I think Rembert's a troublemaker, right?
He can be at times. Yeah, no. Rembert, for those of you guys here who might not know, Rembert's been on the channel a few different times. He's an artist. He works in storyboarding and concepts, but he works in a way that I think people perceive as being just like this fully formed idea just leaping from his mind, and
they're amazing drawings.
Agreed. I like it's wild to get to talk to both of you, two profoundly skilled artists. But no, I think that people assume this idea that you just start a drawing and everything else follows. But for you, when you start a piece, when you're sitting down to render something, or even if you're just sitting down to draw a gesture, I'd be curious to hear your view on how it is that you start breaking something down. Like this idea of what you want to draw, because you're not always drawing from reference. Right now, you're not drawing from reference. Right. And then also in the chat, Rembert, tell us how you start a thing when you're drawing just from imagination, just to get possibly two contrasting ideas.
So are you asking Rembert or me?
Both of you guys, yeah.
Okay.
So when you sit down to start drawing something, you were talking about this hierarchy of ideas of how you kind of approach the how, why, and everything of a drawing. Do you always start with gesture?
I do, but I think it's for me, I think there might be different ends. I think I do a lot of this. This is all mind mapping, right? You could think of it like that, or breaking down historical periods. I want to know sometimes, as an art historian too, why certain works within a period were made. So sometimes gesture for me can be developing like a larger framework of just what's happening and why. But if it's like specific to just figure, like there's any number of ways that I would maybe just begin by laying something in, but it's all just for me asymmetry. Like in the real deliberate, no, like build up mechanics of gesture, all I'm doing is assigning a curve, which is a diagonal, to a body part, leaving a bit of space so that there's some hand holding between these curves, right? That represents the next body part. So I'd say every curve for me represents a body part. The negative space or the hand hold or chaining between them represents the kind of the carryover of movement from one to the next. And then I'll just work it down. In the gesture class, each one of these would be lengthened to a deliberate proportion responsive to that part of the body. So like this is the length of the neck, that's the length of the thoracic, this is the length of the abdomen, etc. And then down
one person,
yeah,
it kind of time. This person in the chat kind of timed a question with what you're talking about here. Cold Sato asks, "How do you know when you should make the stretch 2 diagonals or 1?"
To me, it's always 2 diagonals. This part, because the curve bends 2 ways. But I think Rembert has a much more developed capacity for delivering an instant kind of scene. I think that it's a wonderful skill that like that. I don't think I do as much. My gesture is more. So I don't think that I might not even be qualified to answer that question in a certain way. Mine is more like I think mine's always more instructional. It's didactic for explanation for students. And then it's didactic for me as this is a tool of analytical investigation for figures and then other ideas.
I see. No, I think you're selling yourself short on the idea of like thinking that you don't necessarily get to answer this one. Like you're not prepared or qualified on this one. I think that like there are going to be different ways that people will look at different pieces of art, and I think that yours has just as much merit in the idea of being this like finished piece.
Yeah, no, I'm happy. I'm also happy to, be deferential, definitely humble, but I think it's just different, I think they're just different things. Like I tend not to do just drawing from imagination as much. I'm almost always explaining, if you can't tell.
No, that's fair. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that does come up quite often working with people who are instructors. You kind of often like fall into that instructional mode.
Yeah.
There was one question here. Well, there's a couple. I think we should probably get out of the way here nice and early. Abhishek Samuel was asking, can you suggest some books for gesture? Stephen Michael Hampton, Dr. Stephen Michael Hampton. I believe you maybe have a book that you can personally recommend.
Yeah, I have a book coming out on gesture at the end of the year, but I think there's a lot that are I think the more you buy, the better. Right, because the best thing you could do is, I think, find a lot of different approaches and then see if you can work your way in from there. So, I think Will Eisner's book is interesting. He has some great thoughts on the archetype of the body as a way that kind of provokes an immediate reaction to a psychology. And he has little rows of silhouettes that describes what the body is doing as an emotion. Glenn Vilppu's book is fantastic. That's the one I learned on. And then you could contrast, you look at force books. But the thing is,
from Mike,
yeah, everybody's doing the same thing. It's all this. So this would be the through line. It really doesn't matter who you look at, as long as you notice that everybody's doing the same thing. And then if you want to go more illustrational, you could look at the James McMullen high focus drawing book, and that's really like the force drawing book, but much more immediate to the contour, less stylized. You could look at what's the Disney animators at Walt Stanchfield tomes on his thoughts and discussions of gesture. There's all of them. But what I would do, regardless of what you look at, is find what's this is what's consistent. And then once you know that, then you could try to work backwards. I don't tend to see a lot that doesn't use this in some way. I would say these ones all do. Yeah, I do.
Yeah. That's the main thing. Gesture is usually finding that through line, like you were saying. This is kind of the thing.
Loomis. Go ahead.
Is that what I
Sorry.
miss? Oh no, I was just gonna say this is the kind of thing I was trying to get at a little bit. Is that honestly every instructor is different. Each of them have some
Right.
overlapping things, and oftentimes those will apply to you in a different way based on what the instructor, like how the instructor is approaching it and what they're
Right.
doing. If the thing your end goal overlaps with what their end goal was,
Yeah.
I think
But
that's the biggest thing for any instructor in general. There was also another question here. Some people were asking when your course will be out. What is that course? The thing that I'm getting here is that this is tentatively titled just the gesture course
that makes it
currently.
sound like really intimidating.
It's at the end of it, you will know gesture.
Good.
And then that will be on pre-sale here at the beginning of December. The actual date for when those lessons will start coming out will just be at the end of that pre-sale window. And typically that pre-sale window is the time to save the most on that course, to just kind of like make your money go the farthest. But yeah, if you guys were interested in that, you guys will be able to find that over at the same link that you guys can find Steven's courses currently that are on sale for 20% off right now. Steven, do we actually currently have your book as a PDF on the website? Or do we need to
I,
fix this?
I don't think so.
Ooh, we got to change that. But yeah, if you guys are interested, please go save some money right now. That's like, while we like everyone learning things very, very, very much, the people who put the work in to make these courses do indeed put in that work. So you want
Yeah.
to make sure that they can get paid, and better than some place that's just going to give them like $6 for someone having got their course. So if you guys can help them out, that's great. If not, here's the whole rest of this stream and that challenge that's up on Proko right now, where you guys can get that course for free. So from here, we have some other questions, but is there anything that you want to discuss more before we get into some questions?
Yeah, I just say that like all this stuff here that we're talking about is all in the course. And in the course, I
Mm-hmm.
have slides and I try to look at like a comparative model for how people use gesture. And rereading Loomis, Loomis talks a lot about Hogarth. So, we're always like into Loomis, or I'm into this guy or that guy, but they're always looking at someone else too. So like
Hmm.
the difference, even though like we said, yeah, there's a lot of asymmetry, there is similarities and, like you said, differences. So Loomis looks at gesture. He talks about it really late. Like Loomis's gesture comes on like page 78, I think. But sometimes he talks about gesture as lines. They'll start on the outside and then kind of connect to the other side. So he's maybe building gesture across the body and like finding ways to sweep and relate that type of line into something else. That comes from Hogarth's serpentine line. Then Villepeu makes like kind of fragments these, and that would be more Baroque. Like I always thought of Glenn Villepeu as a much more Baroque artist, and
Hmm.
like the way that they're kind of like broken into these more immediate chains. I think then you could compare that to like a Riley method of drawing rhythm, which is more Loomis-like, where you're looking for these larger rhythms and how they set up, these relational points across the body, which to me were always kind of confusing. But this is what I mean by a comparative style. If you have questions about gesture, I think the best way is to try to do a survey of a
Hmm.
lot and then see what sticks. Because my explanation might not work, or may work for some but not for others. So the more you can know about what's available, I think the better for you long term. So you just don't have to feel like you're stuck in one rigid approach of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, comparing and contrasting different techniques and approaches and everything is really, really, really important. But I don't think that there's ever just this one approach. Like you were talking about you gaining new knowledge from different practices and different studies as you do them.
Yeah.
Even you, a person who is plenty well versed in gesture and other like artistic principles and everything, I think you're probably discovering and finding new ways to approach and tackle something.
Yeah, all the time. I want to be, like everybody else, I think you always want to be challenged, never want to be comfortable. Yeah, you want to try
Hmm.
to be learning all the time, I
And
think.
yet here you are in a pretty nice looking living room and what looks like a fairly comfortable shirt.
Are you commenting on my overly large and comfortable sweater?
No, it just looks like a
Oh,
comfy sweater. I can't tell the size
okay.
of the thing. No, it just looks comfy. But you said you never wanted to be comfortable.
Oh, right. Yeah. At home, I just don't ever want to leave home.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be kind of challenged in my head, but I do want to be warm and in a sweater.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, there was a question from Priya here. They were asking for tips on how to self critique when they practice gesture. I think this is a
Yeah.
constant problem for people. Do you have
Yeah.
anything for them?
No, I don't. That's just
Ooh.
out of luck. No, I mean, for me, critique has to be you have to connect and understand what you're doing at any given point, right? So, like, again, it's going back to the elaborate buildup. Like, I
Hmm.
look at, like, that seems insane now, right? But if I don't have some kind of, like, at least an overall framework, I can't know what I'm doing wrong.
Hmm.
So, like, when it comes to gesture specifically, what I'm focusing on, if we're doing like self critique here, would just be, have I avoided, like, I never draw this or that, so there's never going to be a vertical or a horizontal. I think it disrupts like the natural kind of feeling of movement in the body. And then I do try to connect a specific mapping to like the way that something's made. And it's super didactic, but I think it's the best way to help people. So, like, I usually do a gesture in 16 lines. And it's not meant to be gimmicky, although I know it kind of sounds like that. But for me, it's always like head. Then I go through 4 lines that would create a torso, cervical, thoracic, stretch, lumbar, and then pelvis. And then 2 to 3 for legs. So femur, space, knee, space, lower leg, and then that continued would be my overall lines, like that's what I'm allowing myself to use to begin the indication of the figure. So that's what I'm working with, and then my merit for success is, have I created a consistent sense and push of motion from the head to the foot, right? So that would be my goal that I can then measure. So if there's been a loss, right, if I've broken movement, or there isn't a carryover, or like, a sense of timing and rhythm as it's kind of moving from head to foot, then I know what to look at, and I probably have some ideas about why. So, like, what usually happens with people is they don't handhold. Like, there's too much of a distance between the lines, even if they're curved. Or I think in the torso especially, people always falter with like getting closer to symmetry. And that's just learning to look at the idea, right? Learning to appreciate the idea that's being drawn, the lines,
Hmm.
and not the contour. And this goes back to that. This is the last thing I'll say, that thing about realism. At this stage in gesture, it's so important to allow yourself to just think about the idea through which you're representing, right? Because as soon as I look at what I'm representing, then I'm doing something different. Then I'm recording the outside, right? And that's a different maybe way of thinking about gesture.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that would be my focus. My focus is on movement, and then thematically trying to set myself up to understand anatomy, because that is the right. That would be the contour of the anatomy, is that the muscles exist in asymmetrical groups or passive and active groups. And if I'm really looking to accomplish a feeling of realism, I use this type of gesture to sensitize students to the interplay of anatomy really early on, because this isn't immediately evident, like when we're looking at the outside of the figure, right? That
Hmm.
right, these muscle groups exist in counterposition. So that would be that's one example of setting up a series of steps or concerns so that I can judge whether I've done something, accurate, quote unquote, to my drawing or for my drawing. And
Hmm.
then, every stage for me has a different criteria. So perspective and skeleton, I would set up different standards or things that I'm looking to accomplish, and so on and so forth.
Okay. No, I think this is a valid way of like getting to answer the idea of feedback. The things that you look for in your process.
Yeah.
Like we mentioned earlier, there is a challenge going on right now around gesture. And this one that we've got going right now for this week is actually hands and feet. And Marion rolling in the chat asked, could we have a hand and foot demo to help with this week's challenge, please?
Sure.
All right. Here we go. Now you guys are just gonna screenshot the thing that he draws, and just go ahead and turn that in. You just have to beat him to it before he posts it on Proko, and then it can be yours.
So I mean, for gestures of hands and feet, I think there's also so much interesting there. So like what I think about, and then I'll make the drawing, is like what are we using hands and feet for? So hands specifically have this massive role of punctuating the nonverbal expression of the body. And like the example I always give that is stupid, but I think it helps connect people with it, is that if you've ever seen Talladega Nights with Will Ferrell, when he's like for doing his initial interview after having won his first race, and he's his hands kind of come up into screen while he's talking that are disconnected from the patterning and the visual organization of his body to produce an expression. And the interviewer keeps pushing his hands down and they keep going up. So that's maybe funny because the hands are disconnected from what the body is doing. So for gesture, we use our hands here, and this would be considered comfortable. And then if you use your hands above that range, this is considered, maybe hysterical or elevated in terms of expression.
Yeah.
Right. So if you go into Stan's office, you should probably have your hands here, or you
ready to defend yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not here, right? Like if you walk down the street and you're like talking to somebody with your hands up there, that's maybe you're insane, right? Or people might think that. And then there's really specific ways people use their hands. There's symbols. There's ways that we communicate like community or divisiveness by the ways that the hands like push away from the body or towards. We just the best time to study this is always like during presidential elections.
Yeah,
the analysis.
There's like the pointing or the little little knuckle point fist thing.
Right. So yeah, like and just like what it means and like I love when people do that. Like what is the subtext of why he used his hand in that way? And so there's a lot. I mean, you could learn a lot, even though it's anxiety producing. But so for gesture, what I always try to do to make that as easy as possible. So again, the idea here is I'm trying to give this setup so that people can disconnect from rendering the wrinkle on a knuckle. Like that, maybe that isn't realistic. Maybe that's not going to animate your drawing in a way that feels real. That maybe what makes something feel real is the initial placement and indication of it. The way that you tether that, the position of the hand or the overall movement of the body, to something that someone will take away from it. The lighting, the rendering, the realization, and like a perspective viewpoint, maybe all of that's secondary or tertiary. So what do hands do? How do we use them? What do you say with them? Would be first. Second would be when I actually make them, I always look for the distance of the wrist. So let's say this is like, maybe this is radius, and then this is your ulna. And then that distance, right, whatever that width is, you can usually project, right, as a C or as an S. So one consistent motion into the end of the fingers. And this will, there's only so much flexion side to side that the hand can make. So it's not going to be too dramatic from here. Like I can't have it go like that. So it's going to be a subtle C or S. Maybe if the hand's bent a little bit from the wrist, it could go this way. Like that would be the hand. Then what would be the gesture? What's the gesture of the bones of the hand? What's the design of the hand itself? And the hand has this really, really cool asymmetry, right? So all of the metacarpals spiral or spoke wheel out from the carpal tunnel because they're going from a condensed or collapsed area to a more expanded area. And they also have their own design. So gesture in this case might be trying to adapt to and materialize the design of a form. And that continues into the middle finger where everything is on that arc. And that's all an echo or like an early echo of the carpal tunnel. And then if this is the center line of the finger, let's say your middle is the center line of the hand, all the other fingers gesture in towards that. Right. So again, another level of analysis, just like we did the body. I talked about story, idea, nonverbal, what is it that what is the form that I'm looking at? What is its design? And then when I'm comfortable with that, then maybe I could take that and then distill that complex idea into something simple. So now I have this idea of the peak, that the hand is always tallest at the middle finger, and that echoes into the end of the knuckles and the ends of the fingers. So I'll cap this, just like I'm putting a glove on the hand, right? Where maybe that middle finger is. And then from here, that would be a lot of what I do for a gesture, but I could build on, maybe I could add some shapes for a thumb, or I could start to pull this apart and introduce some negative shapes. If this is like the first finger and then the middle finger, inevitably with hand demos, I always add like another finger or draw fewer. Not because you would think that I would say that because I have a reason for it, because I've had a reason for a lot of things. But normally it's just because I stopped paying attention at some point, or I'm lazy and I have a brain fart or something like that. Right. So then I would look for maybe the arcing of the knuckles. Right? This would be another nice way to start to think about gesture. I also like to think about the separation of the middle 2 to 3 fingers. Usually that gets kind of used gesturally as a hook, or these get used together as some kind of shape. And then I'll separate my middle finger if it is, or little finger. So that would be lay-in. That's all my concerns of like rhythmic connection to the body, the integral design of the form itself, right? And then how that continues out into the hand or the end of the form. After this, I'd shift into principles of construction. Like what is the perspective form of each part?
Mm-hmm. In keeping with this, there was one question that maybe we can address while you're in the process of something here. Kyori was asking, when you practice gesture, how do you keep in mind the anatomical parts? I sometimes end up just doing whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's not an easy answer, right? Because it's like, these are the anatomical parts, and then I'm designing back from that, right? I'm simplifying them back. Or like in this one, all of these lines were related to a larger anatomical framing, which was the way that our skeleton positions our body. So I took from this the idea that like we're naturally in a series of counter positions. So this was what I pulled away. Again, another term that's really important but difficult for people early on is gesture is really an abstraction. An abstraction meaning to withdraw, to take the most important thing away, right? Not that there's like, a 30-year-old man on acid running around in his underwear throwing paint everywhere. Like abstraction is a horrible stereotype, but this is a really useful thing. All drawing is an abstraction, right, of the world or of how we see or think. So I'm distilling what is the most important, which would be, the counter curves, the way that the body is set up to make this bipedal tower, which is in this tension of one thing against another, stay upright. And then another level would be that even though it's not deliberate and on the contour, the anatomy is in that also juxtaposition, right, of high versus low or curve offset by curve. So that's the way that I would introduce anatomy, or that I guess I would say that's the way anatomy is already introduced for me.
I see. It's just already like built into that process there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you're asking like, when do you draw muscles, right? I would use this to set up a figure, right? My gesture. And then once I'm confident and comfortable with the setup, then I would turn that into a perspective. And then once I have a perspective where I understand the planes of a form, then I would put muscles on it. But we never got Rembert's question answered.
So the main thing that he chose to answer earlier was, let me get there. He chose to say that he actually learned from you because he was studying animation. He enjoyed watching and applying the solid construction method that you had. And then he kind of refers to the way that you approach something, or defers to it whenever he.
Well, that's very surprising, but that's very, very cool. So I think Steven left out of just.
I think I'm back. Of course, in the middle of the first time where I'm like really saying something here. Um, yeah, no. So no, it seemed like he was saying that he possibly just works in the same kind of way that you do, and he's just taking it and applying it to a different end goal. You know?
Oh, yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. It turns out you taught a whole bunch of artists. Look at
That's
that.
crazy.
Yeah. And if you guys want to also be taught by Stephen Michael Hampton, you can too at proko.com/Hampton. You can save 20% right now during our Black Friday sale that runs until the end of this month. That's my spiel for that sale there. I just had to do it. It was too good of a moment,
That's
Stephen.
it. It's hard to pass that one up.
Yeah, no, if at any point in time, guys, I kind of like disappear for a moment, there's some people, yet again, for any of you live stream viewers, common live stream Proko viewers, they're working on our internet. So we'd have to deal with that a little bit. We did have a couple other questions. Would you like those?
Yeah, I think that just real quick, the only thing I'd want to say is I know that like sometimes an explanation, because I get excited and maybe I've had too much coffee, I can make things sound confusing, but I really think that anybody can learn this. And like, you put in a little time and anybody can figure out gesture. It doesn't have to be, if this isn't your, like, your mind isn't the same, or doesn't kind of deal with the same type, like has organization. If organization doesn't make the world feel safe for you, like it does for me, then like there's lots of ways and avenues that you can learn gesture. It's really, something that's really useful, and anybody can do it. So if I do come across as maybe making it feel more difficult, then just, there's lots of other resources too, but it's something you guys can definitely learn.
I do think that there, like you said, it can be something that comes off as really, really complex when you actually break down and identify all the steps and different things that are
Yeah.
oftentimes intuitively happening. But like if you were to see a chart of you to just like walk forward, it would be huge. There's so many if this then that's like this is just like a identifying all of those steps. And so you're seeing each one of them written out. But once you actually go through it a few times with a little bit of the clear knowledge that this is what's happening, it's not something where you think about every single one of these steps in this way.
No.
It just happens. And then maybe every once in a while you revisit the idea of like, did I really nail the why here? But it's not like you have to write out the chart as you do every single drawing,
No.
That's not how this goes. This is just because it's being taught. The way that you teach something versus how you do something is very different.
Yeah. So like when I draw a figure or anything, I make a list. And this goes back to the other question of like critique. And I think the goal at the end of anybody's drawing experience is that you learn a thing to collapse a thing. So like, you think about people, that you like and their drawings and the directness of them. Well, I think that only is there because they've collapsed a number of steps into having like this brevity of intention. And that's a great thing to be able to do. But if you try it, and it could also be really intimidating. So just also know that the goal is to not make really long kind of list-based drawings. It's just to identify everything so that you understand it. And then once you're there, then you could play with it and you could take things out or edit. But this is how I would use gesture as a means to an end. It's a means to get through the drawing, to identify where I want to start and then start working through it.
So let's see. Would you like another question?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So actually, I don't know. This is kind of an interesting one that I think I'd like to hear. This isn't necessarily like an art process one, but Russell Kwan was asking, what is your approach for developing a process and like a process that you apply to each one of those?
Wait, you cut out in the middle, so I don't know.
That sounds right. Russell Kwan was asking, what is your approach for developing a process and a curriculum?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been doing that for 25 years. I've been teaching for 25 years. So I've taught a lot. Like, you might not like it, It might not be the easiest way, but the best way I think to learn something is to have to teach it. And if
Yep.
you're introverted like me, it's just fear. It's just terror of being in front of people that will, make you over prepare. So I tend to over prepare, but whether it's teaching a history class, because I teach, the history of design at a college near me, or a drawing class, I tend to go on Amazon and buy every book that's been written about a subject, and then I try to find the through line for everything. Or I try to find one book I really identify with as far as like the lens, the perspective, or the method that's being used. But I think so something like that in terms of preparation, like you have to have some relationship to research, right, for a subject. And then after that, it's how you organize it. I mean, drawing is and gesture for me has all these broader implications too, because I think I started out drawing, but it really helped me to think. Like how I drew and began to drew when I was in undergrad was really a great exercise in logic and just structuring my thinking. And so I think, like so much of what I do is teaching now, that the organization of drawing really helped me with, the organization of my thinking as someone that's largely kind of visual. But developing a curriculum seems to need to, depending on the subject, account for a lot, right? And so I would start the same way. Like if I'm teaching a college course, it'd be like, well, week 1 is basically the gesture of that idea. And what is the introduction of an idea if we're teaching a history course? It would be presenting the large themes, right, that were prevalent in like the life of that course that might take a student from the beginning to the end. And that's no different than a gesture drawing. I'm constructing the broad themes about the body and its presentation in that stance, right, or in that position. And then what would happen on subsequent weeks? Well, week 2, maybe we just look at that idea from 1910 to 1920, right? And then so that might be refining a component of the body. And then week 3 is, right, the next decade. And that gives you another small piece, right? So, and that would be in our drawing process, the idea of, well, now we're going to add the skeleton. So this is week 2, or this is 1930s, right? And so on and so forth. But still, week 1 would be, how do you summarize and present the theme that is most important to the story you're going to tell somebody in this course? So I'd say curriculum development is a lot like drawing. You can use the same workflow, but it just takes some research.
Yeah, no, agreed. Like like you said, it's the idea of everything, working big to small.
Yeah.
There's one I liked here. So earlier on, when you were drawing a torso, and when you were describing the idea, you'll start with something and put it into perspective, or sometimes the reverse. You'll start something in perspective and then build on top of that. Someone in the chat asked, why not just use forms to draw the body instead of gesture?
Sure. Why not? Like, I'm not against it. I'm not opposed to it. So like that would be another way of building gesture. And I cover that in the gesture course too. Like that would be, so some people prefer, instead of the whole thing, instead of doing like the whole figure, some people prefer part to part. And so I talk about in the course too, that'd be the secondary approach, where like instead of going through in organizing the entire body through this connective tissue of asymmetry and rhythm, instead we can look at the body as a series of manageable shapes. So head is this shape, neck is this shape, torso is this shape or form, however you want to refer to them. And this might be a better approach for people that like distorting and amplifying or changing bodies to create a quicker view of type or archetype or something like that. But for this approach, I would go shape, in my shape, gesture, connection, and perspective. So the head is in, right, if this is my symmetrical view, my process would be, what is the shape doing, or what is the shape's design? That'd be 1. 2, what is its gesture? And that would be normally the tilt and turn, perhaps distortion if you want to create something for character. And then 3 would be, what is the overall perspective? So this might be the shape. So that's my shape. What's the gesture of that shape? The gesture of that shape in my drawing here is that it's tilted. The 2D lean is different. And then the rotation, so tilt and rotation, has changed because now the center line of the shape is closer to one side. So it's just another way of thinking gesture, but it still distills and reduces and simplifies complex information into an abbreviated sequence of line. Where in neck, maybe that's the shape of the neck, but if somebody is like leaning their head forward, maybe that shape needs to take on a greater tilt, right? A more distinct rotation. So I'm moving the center line here so that it looks to be facing that direction. And then more of a stretch, perhaps, if it's expanding or it's stretching. And then I'll connect that. And then maybe the torso. What's the torso shape doing? So this is my shape, right? And when I deal with this shape, I think of the top as having a tilt to describe the gesture, or I should say more specifically, the orientation of the shoulder, and then the weight-based orientation of the pelvis at a tilt. Right? So then I'll connect those. So this would be fine. The only problem I have here with gesture for most people, or where I think you can run into trouble, is when we start to slow down and move part to part, it's very easy to fall back into what most of us who taught ourselves to draw or drew from reference for a long time seem to consistently struggle with, which is going back into this, right? So just doing turd figures.
Yeah.
So I find that this approach is a good like shock to the system to get people out of doing the Mr. Hanky drawings. And then once you have that and you're comfortable, then like this is a nice alternative because you can carry forward some of those ideas that you might be a little more sensitive to now, but then arrive at a quicker stylization of the body to, like create differences in body type or light more immediately. So I hope that answers the question.
No, very much so. Yeah. And not in a way that's like you didn't belabor the point. I think you did it pretty succinctly there.
Thanks for the first time.
No. For anyone who does want some more of your very succinct answers, No, the Status Quo was asking, will this course have any new ideas or info that isn't in your figure invention book?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot. Like basically the course, I think, is structured in a way that is like, that book was 20 years old. So I've had a lot to learn since then, like what wasn't clear in there or what people need as far as further like explanation. So in that course, I do more like I know these are problems that you're going to have. So like early answers for like, how do you foreshorten with gesture? How do you draw front views? The questions that I wished I put in there so I wouldn't have to have answered them for 2 decades afterwards. It's been a nice way for me to like make corrections. And then I also have I talk about 2 approaches, and the one in the figure drawing book only has the asymmetrical approach to drawing. So I also talk about this one in there as well. And then there's a lot of examples, and I think that sets it. It's always different seeing something, done than it's hard to present something on the static space of a page and expect people to really understand it. So I think that's something different that makes it stand out to me.
I'm wondering, just purely for myself in here.
Yeah.
You draw what I have to imagine adds up to most days of your life.
Yeah.
Dr. Stephen Michael Hampton.
I think quite a bit.
As a doctor, what do you recommend for people who possibly end up getting some sort of RSI, repetitive stress injuries, carpal tunnel or anything? How have you avoided that? Because you didn't come into this office dual wielding gauntlets on your hand to keep you going,
Oh my God. Oh, I was really hoping that I wouldn't get a medical question. You know what? I don't think I haven't had that issue.
Okay.
Yeah, knock on wood. So I don't know what is best, but I think it's just as if I could offer a life advice, I think it's really good to rest. And I know for younger artists, there's sometimes a really brutal mindset where it's I want militant critique, and I want to the only way to get better is to work nonstop and just kill and brutalize myself. that's probably part of what leads to it. But it's like, I think if I could offer anything to anyone, it wouldn't be something on gesture. It would just on being kind to yourself, taking care of yourself, like
Mhm.
enjoying this process, trying to have fun learning. I know that I'm intense, but hopefully what comes through is just that I have a sincere love of the subject, and I get excited about it. I wish I had treated it more like a marathon myself. So those are
Okay.
all mistakes I made that, I think could help other people that might end up with like a wrist injury.
Yeah. Uh, there are a couple questions that actually kind of feed into this exact joke topic that I brought up. Just so
Yeah.
everyone knows, by the way, it's not that you're out there doing surgeries or anything. You just recently got your PhD. So
Yeah.
if you guys don't mind, please choose an emoji that you prefer typing. Just in congratulations to Stephen Michael Hampton for having obtained his PhD.
Thank you. Yeah, it
Uh,
was a really long process, so you probably shouldn't congratulate me. I think it took me like over 10 years.
It's like, I am 35 years old, and I'm not even approaching the idea of possibly getting a PhD. So way to go! Congratulations, man.
Thanks, yeah.
10 years is not a problem. Um,
Yeah.
Now, there were two questions in here that I think pair together with a little bit of what you were saying.
Yeah.
So Wadiwasu was asking how to tell you practice gesture enough. And
Hmm.
then on to the next thing, Demon asks, how do we keep figure drawing interesting? I get so bored after drawing so many figures, but I still need practice. Do you think
Hmm.
that there's ever enough practice?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like you have to bring some other things to it. So, like going back to the ridiculous amount of education that I put myself through. Some of that was just like kind of to that question specifically, where it's like, I'm really burnt out on illustration, like drawing and painting. So I'm gonna go study this aspect of art, which I really love. That I think that after a while reinvigorates my enthusiasm for the drawing again, or for the teaching part. So I think it's good to take breaks. I think everything kind of feeds into everything else. Even if you're not drawing, like you want to be more than just somebody that draws. Like sometimes
Yeah.
I get a little annoyed with my students when they're like, the sketchbook never leaves their, like, it's always mediating their experience of the world, and instead of just enjoying a nice dinner, they're like furiously trying to capture the waiter bringing their meal. Like, it's okay, I think, to like enjoy life, right? And to enjoy your experience, and like that all comes back into like the rest and the appreciation you have for your subject. So yeah,
Mhm.
I think for me it's important to take breaks from drawing, or like if you're bored and you're like killing yourself, like putting out more figure study after figure study, know that you're done and know that you need a break. Because the worst thing is to get burnt out.
Yeah.
Burnout is like it's not fun, and you can't really do much about it. I don't know if Steven's ever felt
Oh,
burnout.
very much so. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
like
I had to
it's a
switch.
fatigue.
Yeah. I think it art like you said in all things. There's many concepts that you've gone over throughout this stream, the things that you've talked about that apply to pretty much everything else in art, and
Mhm.
treating it as a marathon is also that. Like with
Right,
the idea of burnout. Like don't just gas yourself out in the first like 5 minutes of the marathon, you know?
right, yeah. Yeah, and
Um
it takes a long time to recover from that. So it's, yeah, like just being kind to yourself. Or like I think sometimes it's helpful to just always be honest with what your interests are. If you're feeling that like figure has lost its interest, then don't push it. Like just
mhm.
find your enthusiasm wherever that is. Do
Is
that.
there is there any particular kind of thing that you do to I don't know, get back from that idea of being on the edge of burnout, you know? Like do you go back to basics, look at the things that visually inspired you or anything like that?
No, unfortunately, I'm just a really unhealthy person when it comes to that. Like, I mean, like I'm happy to give advice on gesture drawing, but like that's like it's sometimes I just have to rest for a long time, which is painful because it's hard to turn my mind off. Like my mind gets going and then it doesn't stop. But
Mhm.
yeah, like I don't know. That's
Okay.
that's probably not my specialty. I don't have a
That's
really
fair.
balanced life.
Okay. Well, I would say that the two people that we've kind of heard from in artists today is you, and then a person who does the exact thing that you talked about as a negative with Rembert. Because have you seen the picture of him when he was on a trip with his wife?
Oh no,
They
I
were
haven't, but
horseback
I
riding.
definitely didn't mean to critique him. Like that
No,
wasn't.
you should. You should. They
I
were
was
horseback
I was in
riding.
no way thinking about him when I said that at all. I did not see that picture either. So you can't. That's
No,
not.
I
Yeah,
don't think it's directly to him, but
yeah.
he does exemplify this thing. They were horseback riding, a thing that you need to use your hands for, and he has a sketchbook out.
Well, I mean that's why he draws amazingly, though. So that would be like that would be the counter argument.
I guess I think he would have been. It would have been okay for him to be able to draw real well if he, you know, looked at the experience after the fact too. That would be plenty fine.
Right. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm glad you brought that up.
I do very much agree with you, though. I think that a person needs to pull back sometimes. I think if you're questioning the idea of if you've done enough gesture practice, I think the more important thing to figure out there is there anything that you can be tackling in a more specific way with what you
Yeah.
think you're missing in your skill set, rather than if there's enough? Because frankly, it's not a quantity thing. It's just
Yeah.
about achieving your goals.
And sometimes it's about like too like sometimes you learn gesture from working through the whole thing. So like if you're tired gesture, go through the rest and then
Yeah.
like do this, and you might bring back to that something that helps you think about your early starts in a different way.
Hmm. Let's see. So we definitely have a few more. Is there anything in particular that you would like to discuss before I like throw you back into the lion's den of questions?
No, no. I mean, I don't like I was saying earlier. I think I don't want to lose people with just like the lecture of it and make it all dry. So maybe like taking questions is like a little bit more informal and welcoming to people.
Okay. All right. So let's see.
I'm a little like you could tell I talk at people a lot just because I do so much teaching. So I don't know. Maybe sometimes it's good to not talk at people all the time.
I think you do a good job. I think you leave space for other people to talk, which isn't a common trait sometimes.
Yeah.
So let's see. I don't know if they want this pronounced this way, but they split the name Siegfried into two, so it looks like Siegfried. Um,
That's nice.
are the courses pre-recorded or are they live? The courses that we have with Steven are pre-recorded. It's something that you can watch and then rewatch over and over and over again, or do at your leisure instead of you having to be there for some live course. There's definitely a merit to that kind of thing where you can ask questions live, like you just did here during this live stream. But for plenty of other people, I think that we found that it's really hard for people to attend some live courses, or their life doesn't make space for that kind of thing. Which I'm sure that you also ran into while working in academia,
Mhm.
which I believe you're back at now, right?
Yeah, yeah. I teach at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something it can be hard to be a person who's like working and doing plenty of other things with your life and still find space and time to be able to go to an in-person class.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what we found works for us. That's not to say that we don't have some live stuff coming up
Nice.
in courses. There's some new features coming to Proko, but I won't tell you about those too much so you don't get mad if it doesn't happen inside of, however much amount of time.
Aw, that sounds fun though.
Yeah, it's good. Don't worry. You will absolutely be one of the people that I think that will want to do this with. I think that not every teacher is one that can do something live, but you're very much one that can.
But some parts of the course are live. I mean, or like there's some feedback that's
Oh, certainly.
after the course, right? Like there's some recorded
Mhm.
feedback for the courses early on because that was
Yeah,
the okay. Yeah.
yeah. There will be critiques like many of our courses
Right.
where people have they have submitted work like you can in that challenge right now, proko.com/challenge for gesture. And then Stephen will give feedback on those things, but
Mhm.
it's not something that you'll get to open up the live stream
Right.
for
Right.
those. But there will be feedback that can feature some of your guys' work that you guys turn in. Um,
Cool live stuff.
yeah, eventually, it's hard. It's hard to build a whole live streaming platform. But we don't want to
Oh,
just do it on Twitch or on YouTube. We want to be able to have some real control, and frankly, be
right.
able to show the things that you kind of need to in art sometimes with
Right.
some like nude figures and stuff.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So let's see. Amunor in the chat was asking, how can we identify the tilt of the three parts of the spine when the figure is viewed from an angle where the spine isn't visible? From a front view, I can only see the center line of the torso.
Right. Doesn't that suck?
I like that being the answer. It's like, yeah, man, sounds rough. Anyway, figure it out.
I mean, that to me is the importance of making this so clear as an idea, because like that, like again, I get like it probably makes some sense here that we're seeing all these different changes in direction and like these different angles or positions of balance. So that's the reason for making it something that I can manage, is that let's say we're doing it from the front. Like how would I bring that to this? Like, so there's no, like, maybe it's just like every rule that I brought up is broken. There's only like a symmetrical view of the torso and rib cage. Like that's, this would be probably the hardest pose I would say for any gesture, because it's just so boring, right? There's like the front view, which I know is required of so many different like character artists because it's the turnaround kind of thing, would be super important, but just terrifyingly boring. But the spine here would be visualized in 3D. So if the neck is pushing the head forward, then I would have to be, or I'd forced to be using wrapping lines to showing that tilting back. And then the neck would be going the opposite way. So I think this is the best we can do, is I would use wrapping line as a tool of, like you'd see I use that tool quite a bit in my gesture as a way to suggest and summarize 3D direction without saying the 3D direction. So like I think Marshall talks about these as like rubber bands on the outside of a form. So your wrapping lines could be rubber bands, right, that you're using that express the surface contour of a form. And then that would tell me the same thing that's happening from profile, but I don't get that fun, dramatic diagonal. But it is still a diagonal. It's just a spatial diagonal.
Yeah, I think it's when typically in a form there's some sort, like if you're drawing from reference, or inventing something where you're going to have realistic indications. Like if my arm is up like this here, there's so much information just to take from the angle of this cross contour that's
Right.
put in there by my sleeve being where it
Right.
is. You
Right.
feel all of those things,
Yeah.
and that's all these cross contours are. These rubber bands on here, all of that implies something. It's the idea that someone thinks that the head is going to be easier because you don't have to like place a bunch of limbs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But no, like in the courses that you have or the free videos on Proko, you talk about head construction and everything in there. There's indications for perspective that are all up and down the face and the head.
Yeah.
They're all things that you don't necessarily think about when you look at it, but those are they communicate something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, was there anything else that you wanted to say about this?
No, but I was just remembering when the first time I came down to Proko, I did a talk on anatomy and gesture.
Mm-hmm.
That was with, I think you filmed it.
I did.
Yeah.
That was a fun one. It was funny because usually when someone comes in and they're recording a thing where they're mostly talking to the camera, we don't have to give them too many questions. I'll sit there and I'll kind of like write out little like bullet points of notes. It's like, oh, this part's pretty good. I should probably pull that for like a short or a tip or something,
Right.
or make sure that's included. And then I found myself like I had a bullet point for like one like every a minute and a half. And I was like, all right, I'm just gonna stop taking notes. The whole thing's good.
That's funny.
And it's not like that's not to like blow smoke or anything. Like no, it was genuinely just a very good one. It was a rare time where we released a shorter version of the video, but then we also put out a version that was just the entire thing essentially unedited.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you know about this? Have we talked about that?
I think I remember seeing that there was two different ones. But yeah, I think it was like, I know that it was just really intense because I just kind of came in and went for it. I don't know that we discussed it a whole lot before.
We did not. Yeah. we did not. It was longer than I had expected, but in a good way. For anyone interested in that video, I'm going to drop that here into the chat. There's a link there for you guys to check that out. And then I believe that there's a link in the description where you guys can find that full longer version of the video. Oftentimes, if we have some longer version of a video that we put out, it's buried. It's like this exclusive, quiet, living in the background kind of thing. That video, that full length one, got so many views because it got shared all over Discord.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, it got a Herculean amount of views through being shared on Discord. It was very cool to see happen.
Wow. How come Discord, I wonder?
I imagine that there was probably just some Discord server somewhere out there that was mostly focused around art, where someone was like, oh my God, Stephen Michael Hampton has like a free course. It's like an hour and a half long. It's all free. Go watch it now.
that was probably the first thing I had done for YouTube, really, at all, for you guys.
Yeah. In case you guys don't know, Stephen actually does have his own channel here on YouTube, which I believe you can find at this name. On the channel. You guys should check it out. It's a bunch of free content. If you guys can't afford a course for any reason, you guys still want to support or get that knowledge, go over there, check it out. You post shorts, you post reels on Instagram as well, under the same name. The only place I can't find you, Stephen, is on Twitter.
Oh yeah, I don't do that.
Yeah. Every time I go to post something, I go to tag you, and then I just can't. So yeah, if you guys want some free stuff, some free education over there, please go check it out.
But some of them are really well edited by Christian, and then some are just like all the lectures I made for my college classes during COVID with some free stuff. So they don't have the best video production, but there's enough content.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Plus, frankly, I kind of like it when it's just like, this knowledge was too good. I didn't have time to set up a camera. I needed to share it now.
Right. Like, this knowledge is so good, you're gonna have to suffer while you take it in with like the horrible sound quality.
It's like medicine. That's how you know it's working. When it tastes bad.
Right.
Looks like Xana in the chat was asking, as someone who started or reinvested in art later in life, how do you navigate the challenges of self-doubt around age? Do you see age as a potential setback for future artistic career?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something everybody struggles with. I think we're all human, and I mean, I hope everybody struggles with it, because it's something I do. I think about it a lot, but self-doubt is a constant thing. I don't think that goes away. Like, it hasn't gone away for me. Like, drawing gesture better hasn't made it better, or wanting to learn a new subject hasn't, like, I don't feel resolved, or like my self-doubt has gone away. So maybe there's something comforting just in knowing that, like, other people still have it, and that it's like a really normal thing. And if you know that, then maybe it's not as scary, because we're all in the same boat in a certain sense, right? Or something like that. But it's really important, I think, to just focus on enjoying what you're doing while you're doing it, and always have a reason for you. If you're in your head about it, I know that's easier said than done, but being in your head about something and worrying about others, or others' perception of you as you're doing it, or perhaps potential consequences long term trying to do something, it's a great way to just ruin that for you without anybody ever knowing that you're having any thoughts of self-doubt at all. So I think it's like, I get it. I don't have the discipline to practice anything that I'm saying, but at least those are the things I've been able to come up with for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think draw dancing like nobody's watching.
Sure. Yeah.
Just go for it. Do the thing.
Just have fun. Try to have fun.
There are a couple different things here. I want to put this one first because they paid some money. We got a super chat.
Uh-oh, what is that?
So they paid a little tip, a little like monetary amount to get their thing featured here. So I want to make sure and get this in here. The Rock Kink is asking, any advice on how to learn taking your time and enjoy the processes of learning to draw? I sometimes find myself lost in thought and impatient while in the middle of an important exercise.
Hmm.
What do you think?
I mean, I think some of that goes back to just enjoyment. Like, sometimes it's being honest and just being like, am I even enjoying this exercise at all? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so if like maybe there's not a way, in other words, to force the enjoyment, like to force the continuation of that exercise. So I mean, that my solution was like why I taught the way I did. It's like these things was because of that reason, like that I would get impatient with a thing. That's why I studied different, had different things and like have a middle name that I use for different books and instead of my first proper name because I was feeling the same thing, right? So like have looking at art in different sections. So maybe I'm tired of drawing right now. Drawing sucks. I'm tired of boxes. I'm tired of this. Well, like, what are you interested in learning drawing for? Is it like maybe I could take some time and learn about that, and then I have a better appreciation of the design or what I might want to aim my drawing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I dealt with it. Like again, it's how am I making something? Why am I making it? Maybe shift to that, or like what am I making it about? Like this is how I avoided burnout when I did it. For me, study has been seasonal. Like I'll feel it come on. I'll just like, I don't want to draw anymore. Like that's it. Like I couldn't force it if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like I can't read anymore. If I'm not gonna, see another book for months. So it's again, it's being honest, but also trying to be strategic so that you're still learning something and enjoying and maybe engaged with art, but looking at it from a different point of view.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. I think personally, after art school, I went through this like whole like self discovery kind of phase where I was trying to figure out, I had been in the middle of trying to switch majors from illustration to animation, and
Mhm.
so I was having to figure out what is the thing that I want to do with art. And I
Yeah.
found that I don't draw to make some complete piece very often.
Mhm.
More than anything else, I'm drawing to illustrate the thing that I see in my mind for the
Yeah.
next step in a purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that really helped me identify number one, what I needed to work on still,
Mhm.
and then to figure out just what I wanted to do professionally, even. And I think
Yeah.
that's as important as anything else while you study as well.
Yeah, because you seem also like a pretty analytical guy.
Oh, thank you. You have given me much too much credit there.
Yeah, but
But I'll
other
take it.
people are intuitive, and like maybe like that suggest like my suggestion might not work for intuitive people. Maybe
Mm,
because there's all kinds of artists that are more on the intuitive side that don't have a like a rigid way of thinking too, and
that's fair.
and like maybe it's just also for the question specifically like just knowing who you are, like just knowing yourself and just being honest.
Hmm. I think that's an important thing. I think yet again across all of art,
Yeah,
being honest with yourself. There was that question earlier about uh, tips for critiquing yourself.
yeah,
I think one of the most important things that you can do is be actually honest with your critique. That doesn't mean to just
right,
always be mean to yourself, because
yeah,
frankly, I'm going to say a swear. That's a shitty critique.
yeah,
Whether you're giving that to somebody else or to yourself, that's bad.
yeah.
But just be realistic about the thing. There was the blue line drawing that you were doing. I think it's a little up and to the left on this canvas. I think that they had asked this question when you were on the figure more on the left.
Mhm.
But Know the Status Quo was asking, is the drawing Michael's doing still considered the gesture phase, or has it moved on to construction?
Yeah, definitely construction, I would say here, where I'm starting to think about shapes and perspectives. But so my goes gesture. All right, sometimes I think about drawings gesture, which is, it's about as intuitive as I get or like loose. And then the next step would be construction, which is, assessing and trying to digest this into a practical framework. But then I come back to gesture again because this is very rigid. So you see what I'm doing down here, like with the shapes on the legs. When I think about muscles, I have a tendency to think of them like as patterns and gestural forms. So when I think about, like, as soon as I have all my planes and I have a clear idea of where surfaces are on the body, then I'll start to dance, or think about I don't start dancing like in person, but I start to move these tumbling shapes down the leg as a way to reconnect with a sense of that balance and movement, and shift it out of the construction being so rigid. Because that's, again, this is a large impetus for the beginning of the gesture. Like, look at the lines and how I talked about them with the skeleton and everything. But another would be the passive and active groups of anatomy. So that by the time I get back to the contour, I do want to be rediscovering the idea that the contours are what I started with and is buried now on the inside. But that's another interesting thing, is like, think about what I've done over here with gesture and how weird it might look, or loose, or like non-figurative. But also remember that I used it to start this, and now where is it? Well, it's not even there. I mean, it's there in the sense that it began what I developed, but it's not there visually. It's not like I've made you continue to stare at that. It was a means to an end. And I think that's another good way to think about, or help to find, what gesture can be, is like, it is your thinking and mapping and planning early on, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to be front and center for people, like that direct development and relationship of line.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, for those of you guys who are in the chat, are any of you guys drawing at the exact same time right now while Steven's drawing? I'm always curious. I feel like there's this element of like art discussion and ASMR podcast kind of vibe sometimes to some of the live streams. Because it'll come up pretty often where people will put on the Draftsman podcast while they work. So I'm curious if anyone. I don't know if I could do that one. I don't know how you feel about this. Do you put on anything in particular? Yeah, at least about like listening to something that's the same thing, or typically about the same thing that I'm doing. Yeah, like that one seems like it would, like it runs up too close against the thing that I'm putting that portion of my brain on, so it would like distract me from it.
Yeah, sometimes I can I definitely think that I can be in a space with drawing where I listen really well, but if someone looks at me, I look like I'm not paying attention at all. Right? Like, I look totally distracted. And then sometimes not. Sometimes I totally agree with you. Yeah, it would be like really hard to draw and then focus on something else.
Yeah, I do that thing where I'm listening, but it's just that it's like a different portion of my brain that operates the eyes where I make eye contact, you know?
Right.
Yeah. We actually got a lot of yeses here. Holy crap. One person said that they're painting. Seth,
Whoa.
you're a madman.
Wow.
That's crazy.
That's cool.
Yeah, thank you guys for letting us accompany you while you guys work. All right. Let's see. I think there was one question here in the chat. Okay, yeah. So it looks like PieBite was asking in here, what is the amount that like a person could save off the course of yours if they buy it during the sale right now, Steven?
I think 20%.
Yeah. It's 20%. Yeah. Where could they find that again?
On Proko.com.
Yeah, nailed it.
I know some things.
Yeah, no, you guys could save 20% off across the website right now. That's going to be on brushes, tools, photo reference packs, courses, anything that you could possibly need to make art with, both on the education side and on the tool side of things. There's also, if you guys cannot buy something, that's totally okay. We respect this, and I'm there too. It hasn't been paycheck time yet in the last couple weeks. So you guys can also get stuff totally for free over at proko.com/free. And you guys can get a starter pack of lessons that's over there. That's the stuff that's not on YouTube. It's the things that's normally in just the premium paid courses. And there is a little bit of Stephen Michael Hampton in there as well, if you guys want that. But if you can't wait for that and you want the new thing that Steven's working on, you guys go over to proko.com/challenge. You guys can submit some work in the gesture challenge that's running right now to possibly get a course for free. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that you would be one of the very first people to be included with having gotten this course, because it won't even be on pre-sale yet at the time that the gesture challenge ends. So go do it. Go check it out. Proko.com/challenge. All these things, they're all up and down the links in these descriptions, in the chat, and everything else. So,
Nice.
yeah. Let's see here. Yeah. Pie, thank you. I appreciate a person putting something in the chat to throw that I can use to throw to the sale thing, rather than me just popping up and mentioning it.
How do you like to draw gestures, Stephen? What is your like preferred approach?
For me, it usually ends up being just the single side of the actual form itself, just for the action lines. Because more than anything else, I really enjoy, and this is the worst idea, don't do this thing. I like nailing in the gesture really quickly with as few lines as possible, and then spending all of my time just inking away at small details. I'm doing the worst thing that you're not supposed to do, because I'm not drawing for any purpose besides for myself.
Right. But that's still you're still using a gesture.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And why would it be the worst thing?
Because there's definitely a better way to prioritize my time, you know? I think that I could respect my time, my efforts, and make something that is also at the same time a worthwhile thing for someone else to look at in some ways. It's the thing that I would tell someone is totally okay to do, but I know that I'm doing it for selfish reasons.
Just to relax, to unwind. What do you like to draw for? Are you like doing a comic or a story, or just like to sketch characters or something?
So usually this will be something that I'm drawing that's showing some scene or something from something that I'm writing. Cool. I think at this point in time, the thing that I'm doing above all else is writing down those ideas that I found that I was trying to communicate with art. Because I don't find a lot of joy in the full rendering stage of something. I like lines. Yeah. I like contour, you know?
Me too. Yeah.
I don't want to spend my time shading something, really.
No.
Like polishing that thing.
That's interesting.
It's a failing of us Stevens, you know? We Stevens.
We overthink it. We overthink everything.
Yeah. we can't even collectively decide on which way to spell our name. I mean, come on.
I won't enjoy rendering. I won't enjoy anything. You can't make me.
There was a question earlier. Someone had asked, I don't know which person they meant. They had asked, where did you go to school?
Are they asking you?
I don't know.
Oh,
So I'm going to put the question forward to you.
I did my undergrad at Art Center, and then I did a graduate degree in fine art at Claremont Graduate Degree, which is in Southern California. And then I finished a PhD in art history at University of California, Riverside.
Nice. Yeah. And I think at least one of these places you then went on to teach at, because did you not teach at Art Center?
I did. When I was there, I taught there briefly, and then that was fun. But I started teaching really early, like around 2003.
Okay.
Yeah. So I taught all over different Cal States and UCs, and it's been kind of all over Southern California.
Nice. I like that you chose a place that you wanted to be, though. It's not like you taught here in Florida, a little bit in California or anything.
Right. Yeah.
Like California.
Yeah. Well, this is where I grew up, so it's probably should have moved around a little bit more and experienced some things, but I was too busy thinking about gesture in my room. You know. So the pros and cons of learning gesture.
Yeah, absolutely.
You may end up in your room for 40 years.
You picked the most mysterious of mystery boxes. You're still decoding it.
Yeah, exactly. I heard a report that I haven't figured anything out.
I think that's okay also, though. So Lisa Rose was asking, I usually read about gesture drawing as it applies to figures. I don't find many artists talk about gesture drawing to other subjects like landscapes or still life. They would love your thoughts on this.
I think, it could have, I think it definitely has application to other subjects. I mean, the easy subject to transfer it to would be animals, because you have a spine and you have 8 parts, and you could you could move and rationalize using rhythm and movement through the body of an animal, similar to that of a figure. So like, I think that would be the easiest one if I'm drawing a horse. But then other ones, I think I'd be interested in kind of complicating what we might want to say or mean by gesture. But let's say first I'm just drawing a different animal, like a horse, or it could be any quadruped. But I would take the principle from the figure, and because it also has a spine and a series of balance or balances, I can use the same techniques to distill and organize the parts into a relationship of rhythm that I could then design to, help observe the animal. Like if I'm Rembert and I'm riding the horse and I want to draw it from a different view, then I could pattern and remember the cadence of rhythms, right? Because they're just like us in the sense that the shoulder would have that chaotic tower or that quality of balance and imbalance through the leg. We could think about positioning and posing different things. I think landscapes could be similar, right? Like, I think you could see lots of videos by different, maybe especially concept artists that seem to be inventing landscapes for, audience consumption from, imagination of scenes that don't exactly exist. Maybe they'll design a landscape with like a series of rhythmic ties, or maybe gesture means how is it that we're managing to stitch a foreground, middle ground, and background together? Like, is there some kind of element of continuity that ties? So that could be a quality of gesture. Like, here's my dumb road. You can tell I don't do landscape. It's also got a giant horse leg in it in the middle. So you could you could prioritize rhythm as something that might tether all those together. There's lots of good books on landscape, like the Edgar Payne book is really good and talks about thumbnailing and gestural schemes for how to organize a landscape. And then still life to me, I think, is fascinating. But like, I would think of the gesture of a still life as something tied to history, right? So the gesture of a still life, so you could look at it in a lot of different ways, but the biggest idea for me would be like, what is the reason for still life? The reason for still life, my favorite historian on still life is Norman Bryson. He writes about still life historically as this genre that was used as a marker for the transition from a barter economy to mercantile. So and it was funded and mostly, patroned by the church. So the idea that we would have a mercantile economy was bad, because now you're introducing the five senses and the idea that people can be distracted by material goods. So the early gesture of still life, as far as like a compositional why that was consistent, was that there's always a table that's really low to the bottom. Then there's always a huddled mass of objects, right? That are put, let's say this is an envelope, which is another way of gesturing, right? A subject. We put 4 to 5 lines around it and edit the exteriors. But the main reason for still life was to punish you, which is very religious, right? Because you're in a still life, your vision is humiliated. You're forced to look down. Everything weights the bottom of the canvas in a way that doesn't allow you access to where you would like to be, which is the top. This is also the spiritual, right? Like compositional zone of spirituality. Jesus would ascend to the top. So you would be humiliated by bowing. Your attention would be brought down to the bottom, but the whole time you would be indulging like the most exquisite representation of texture, and like the orange is sweating, and like the glimmer of a knife, and then the opulent depiction of different foodstuffs and scales on fish. And then there'd always be like one fork or spoon tenuously balanced off the edge of the table to help produce that anxiety of, like something tumbling into your space. Mm-hmm. So like that to me is gesture of like, what is the why of the genre? And then, can we play with that? Because it's sometimes hard to make still life super interesting. But if you think about like still life as a punishment for your viewers, right, then it's as dirty materialists, right? Like then it's kind of exciting, or maybe it's kind of exciting. But otherwise, like a gesture would be, if we're just looking at objects, like maybe it's not like the rhythm and the relationship of curve isn't the best thing. So if it's like I have 4 or 5 objects, when I'm teaching like observational drawing, I would be gesturing this as plumb lines. So taking 4 to 5 lines to the outermost edges of objects, and then trying to see this as one uniform shape. Like I just put a trash bag around it, and then using that shape to create an effect inside the frame of the composition. So like that shape looks different here, right, than it does up here.
Yeah.
Right. And that would be gesture, because I think that gives a different experience than that gives a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think for a lot of people, they kind of like separate the ideas of gesture design and like pleasing visuals in this way where it's supposed to be something different per like the kind of composition. But at the end of the day, I mean, the same rules apply to if you're designing like a flyer. We've all seen a very bad flyer.
Yeah.
If you just kind of follow the way that your eyes go in something, you'll often find that there's the same kind of rules for any kind of design, whether it's an organic figure, landscape, a flyer, a web page, anything like that. Follow where your eyes go, where you look, and then where you lead from there naturally. Be honest with yourself about those things. And then take what you can from what your natural inclination is on that.
Yeah.
I think
well
it's
said.
massively important.
There's a composition, there's a gesture to composition.
Yeah, no, very much so. Sorry, I was reading. There was a comment here from Proko team member Patrick, and he said, "I think Stephen Michael Hampton just made me finally understand and love still life." Yeah, nailed it, Patrick.
It's hard to love it, but that's one fun reason.
I do like. So, I had you've had an art teacher. You've been an art teacher who was new from the program that you are possibly going to be teaching before. I'm assuming you've had this or been this, right?
What? Wait. Say that again.
So let's say you're going to teach art history, or you're going to be taught art history by a person who just gained the ability to be a teacher. You're really rigid in the beginning of that situation. Like you haven't necessarily learned the flow of the thing. And I had the most rigid art history teacher because she was brand new to becoming the head of this entire program at my school.
Yeah.
She went in depth on so many topics. But I never, ever, ever heard her say the idea of still life and some classical compositions being like a bespoke punishment. Yeah. I've never heard this, and I love it.
Well, yeah. I mean, every art historian is going to teach like with their own method, right? So like she might have just been formal, but that's always so boring. Like I'm only going to learn about like why something looks different, and that's all you need to know. Well, like why does it look different though? It would always be like where I would ask.
Yeah, I think very much so. And I think there's like that idea of, like learning who the patron was of the piece, what year this was made in, what year it was commissioned in, what year it was completed. Those things are actually genuinely very interesting. It's just that you have to have like a little bit of context for why,
that's the biggest thing I took away from like doing fine art or getting a degree in fine art was that's all they're thinking about. But there's so many inherent biases from like the different fields that I've studied. So like illustrators generally don't like fine artists because their technique sucks. Fine artists generally don't like illustrators because their ideas suck. And then art historians don't like either of them because they think they assign meaning to works regardless of what they do as like empty vehicles for producing an object. So, but it's unfortunate because like each one of these fields could learn and develop so much by like integrating with the others. But I can find myself like I like representational work when it's really grounded in an idea that's about our culture or like about the experience of today. And sometimes I get grumpy, when stuff isn't, because that's just my taste.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one thing that like with all of that was that I want people to think of and remember is that idea of finding the thing that is interesting whether that's something that's just interesting to you or interesting to someone else, answers a bunch of the questions that people kept asking about how to keep gesture and gesture practice and art practice in general fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, find that thing that's interesting in there. A bunch of the questions that people asked have all kind of led to that kind of end road or end destination. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from that is to do that from everything that's been said so far. Let's see. We have a few questions here. I kind of like made a call out for questions that we haven't answered yet that people would like answered. I'm going to read 4 questions to you if you're okay with this, and you pick one.
Okay.
Or do you want less? Do you want me to make the executive decision here?
I don't know. 4 is a lot, so I feel
That's
a little
fair.
stressed out. But we could try it.
I'll say I'll read you one at a time each question, and if you really like one, we'll just go in on it, and everyone else gets ignored. All right, so I'm gonna start with Marion's here. Can you help with the laying down pose gesture? They seem so hard thinking horizontally. Why is this?
Sure. So laying down gesture. Maybe you don't do this approach. Maybe this isn't the best, right? Maybe it's hard to see laying down, right, with rhythm and that flattened space. So I might, in a laying down, try to go with this one, more of like the 2D shape build, like form to form. So laying down pose, maybe I stack shapes, like where we looked at the head and then the neck and then the rib cage. The figure can get so abstracted if it's foreshortened and laying down that it might be best to just look at how one thing sits in front or behind something else. So if you're talking about foreshortening, if it's, so like maybe this could be the pelvis, and then maybe there's a leg back here, and then maybe this is the calf bending up, and then we wouldn't see this, foreshortened any longer. But I think this is a more effective way to visualize somebody that might be like laying down. So this would be the spine, this would be an ear, or like a nose, just for context. And then maybe we'd have like an arm come forward. But it's just prioritizing what best presents the idea again, like, which is the easy way to interpret how I started, right? Where I was maybe like a little overly verbose, is just kind of stacking shapes because it's more indicative, or it's a greater indication of what it is that I intend to show and say. If somebody is laying down, maybe it's like you could do something similar, but maybe they're not nearly as foreshortened. But laying down, I would try to look for the same types of rhythmic interchanges. But I always foreshorten gesture if it is somebody that's going to be drawn in this way by using the same cadence of line. But if it's foreshortened, I just make each line shorter, right? So this line, or the line for the pelvis, or if I start to bring a line, let's say this line's going to come forward for a leg. Normally I would draw a leg much longer, but that one is abbreviated, and then I'll push the wraps on top so that it starts to kind of bend it towards the camera. And then, like, to get the average length, what that leg would normally be, I'll do the lower leg not foreshortened. So that should be the length of the upper leg. But that would be like the same exact approach, but still chaining these rhythms together to create that sense of motion.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that answers.
No, I think this does. Yeah. That's the thing to keep in mind. There's a couple different ways for you to tackle how to decode that figure that you're looking at, or invent one,
Right.
More people, oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, yeah. Many. Yeah. Yeah. And it's up to you which ones you deploy. And it'll change based on the situation. Sometimes it'll just be about, like, you were talking about earlier, laying in that envelope and then working down from there. Other times it'll be working from shape to shape, or form to form rather.
Yeah, and I think that's why I started the way I did today, because what matters most to me is that people have an understanding of gesture that they can plug their own interest into, like like something that organizes your priorities, how you want to start, the way that you're thinking about something, anything that pulls you out of not thinking, because maybe somebody draws like you or has different weird concerns about Catholic still lifes like me, or whatever it is. But like everybody should, if you think of it as a stage and not as like a rote technique, I think you're just going to have more fun long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that you would want to mention before we wrap up here?
No, I've said way too much.
I disagree. Unless you're just like tired, in which case, I mean, like take a break, have a snack, drink some water, But other than that, no, I think you said all the things that people needed today.
Nice.
Marion, the person I believe who had asked that question, said thank you so much for answering and helping so very much. So yeah, I think here to wrap this thing up, I want to remind you guys that this whole stream has been brought to you by the Black Friday sale on Proko. Right now, you can save 20% off course or site-wide on courses that are Stephen Michael Hampton's, other people's gesture packs, gesture photo packs, or any sort of tools or anything else you guys could possibly want right now. But if you liked anything that you saw here today, there are a couple different courses from Stephen Michael Hampton that are currently on Proko. You guys can get those for a pretty decent savings right now by using that code BLACK20 and doing other things like bundling up stuff. You can get a greater discount if you guys get more. We don't want you guys just have to pay the same amount if you're getting a whole bunch of stuff. The other thing that I want to make sure you guys know about is that there is a challenge going on. Stephen Michael Hampton, Dr. Stephen Michael Hampton, will be judging you guys very harshly and giving away a course to a couple people who participate in that challenge that is running right now. Right now it's in week 3. You guys can find out a little bit more of it, more about the actual gesture challenge itself on that page. That's linked in the description here on screen. This link, we want you guys to learn some things and have some fun doing it. So I think that's all of my spiel, Stephen.
Awesome. Well, it's great. It's always such a nice treat to get to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you for taking the time today. I look forward to getting to talk to you a little bit more when you come in to record critiques and everything for everybody.
Yeah, that'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you guys all for being here. Come back tomorrow. We're going to have there's no more Stevens in any of these recordings, but we will have a fantastic, very kind artist who's also going to draw in, not in color. Don't be scared. If you guys can't color, that's all right. We're not going to make you guys have to do that right now. Tomorrow we're going to have Josh Hunter Black on the stream. So
awesome.
See you guys later. Have a good one.